Xbox Games Studios, external development at scale for large franchises. Well, four members of Xbox Game Studios discuss Microsoft's approach to external development, how they make it work at scale, and what makes a great external development partner. All right, so this session is in English. So if you want to watch it in Portuguese, just access the right link here at our channel. So let's welcome Esteban Lora, Director at Xbox Game Studios, Adrian Cho, Outsource and Vendor at Manager 343 Industries, Nicole Plum, Outsource Manager at The Initiative, and Sam Carlisle, Senior Program Manager at Xbox Game Studios. How are you, everyone?
Hello.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for the nice introduction. It's good to be back in Brazil, even though it's virtual this year.
well, it's pretty sunny around here. I hope that it's sunny there as well. Well, the screen is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having us this year. Probably most of us have been in Sao Paulo, and we've been to a big festival before, so it's great to still participate this year. So with me, we have a talented group of people that are really the subject matter experts at Xbox Game Studio when it comes to external development. So it's really a pleasure to collaborate with them on a daily basis and just making those projects happen. As you can see in the title, it's just a long title and a fancy title to just say we do large scale games for franchises like Halo, Gears of War, Forza, and others that you may know. But today we want to talk with you a little bit more about what it really means, what happens behind the scenes when we develop those games. And probably you may or may not know that there are a lot of external studios involved in the production of these projects, which almost like movies require many, many people with different skills, different talents and levels of expertise. So today, we're gonna cover that in the panel. We're gonna talk a little bit about what are the main things or priorities when working with studios around the world that deliver these skills and services. And the last part is going to be more like how did we get here as individuals to start a career in AAA projects. So with that, I want to probably spend a few minutes introducing each of us, and probably I'll start with Nicole, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, what's been your journey in the industry, and how you got into the external development as a professional career.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Esteban. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be part of this panel. Thank you for having me. Just so a little bit about my background and my journey here in the industry. I started out in the game industry back in 2008 as an environment artist at Heavy Iron Studios in Los Angeles, which was part of THQ at the time. There I got my first experience into AAA development, working on the video game for the Pixar movie Up. And I was very lucky to be able to have that as my first game dev experience because the team was super helpful and friendly and helped me find my footing within the game industry. After that, I worked on a MMO third-person shooter called Defiance, which was a tie-in to a sci-fi television show. And there I was an environment artist, but I also had my first experience working with external development. And through that, I learned the benefits of having external partners working on a project and just learned at working at the challenges of collaborating that we all faced and generally how to improve the process on both sides. And I think looking back, that first exposure to working with external dev really helped me in future roles as there's a lot of key takeaways from that of what went well, what could have been improved on, and I was able to take that to future projects. So after that, I joined the team at Insomniac Games as an environment artist to work on Sunset Overdrive DLC, and Spider-Man. And that experience was a real period of growth for me as an artist and a developer. And also a personal achievement of mine too, because in college, Insomniac was like the IT studio that I wanted to work at. So it was really cool that I was able to actually be able to work there. And I also had the opportunity to work at Insomniac within a different capacity after I moved to Canada, I was able to join the team again as a freelance artist. So with that, was able to get a different perspective of the developments, working on the other side of the fence, and get kind of more of an understanding of best practices, working externally, and take that forward as well. And after work slowed down with Insomniac freelancing, I ended up joining the team at the Coalition in Vancouver, Canada, uh, where I worked on Gears of War 4 DLC and Gears 5. I was the outsourced art manager for the vehicles and weapons team. And joining that team was actually a career-changing experience for me. And I'm forever grateful that I was able to be a part of it. It was there that I pivoted from art content creation to concentrating fully on external development. And in this role, I was able to take the past experiences that I had learned from both sides of development, improve the process for the external and external teams, and really worked on cultivating the relationships with our external partners there. And I was very fortunate to have just the amazing, talented team there. They really helped encourage me to grow in my role and my career, and just really take ownership. So that was an amazing experience. And that brings me to where I am now. Last year, I moved back to Los Angeles, and I joined the initiative as the outsource manager. And I've been afforded the opportunity to grow in my role more within external development and continue the journey. And it's exciting to be a part of a new team, building a new studio together and working on a new project. And just overall, I'm grateful for the projects that I've been able to work on, just the relationships that I've formed along the way. It's been a roller coaster, but ultimately it's been a lot of hard work, a lot of fun, and just very fortunate for the experiences that I've had.
Wow, thank you, Nicole. Definitely an exciting journey indeed, and really cool projects and studios that you've been part of. So thank you for sharing. We'll move to Adrian Cho with 343 Industries. Adrian, you want to share a little bit about yourself and how you got into managing outsourcing?
Sure thing. Thanks, Esteban. I actually just want to say thanks for having us back at Big. We were there in person probably 2018 and had a really great time, and really fortunate to feel that we're back virtually for this year. My name is Adrian Cho. I'm the outsource and vendor manager at 343 Industries. I'm originally from Canada, and I studied mechanical engineering and industrial design at university. When I graduated, I was actually really fortunate to find a job at a local video company called BioWare. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, other than wasn't quite sure if I was going to be a good mechanical engineer. And so BioWare seemed like a really great place to work, and I felt really lucky to land a job there after school. It was a smaller and independent company back then, and they had just shipped Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, and they were wrapping up Jade Empire. So I don't want to say how many years ago that was, but it definitely was a different industry than it is now. And so the beauty of joining the industry back then was there's a lot of people coming from all different walks of life, and I'm just kind of happy to have my foot in the door. So I started off as a technical artist on Jade Empire. They didn't really know exactly where my background skills would help out the most. So as a technical artist, I kind of just helped watch efficiencies, looked at workflow, and just kind of learning how people made games. And I think that's probably the production pipeline of like the engineering side. I eventually became the lead technical artist on Mass Effect 1. I had some technical skills, and so I would basically kind of work with artists and programmers and try to solve problems. After Mass Effect 1, I transitioned to an art producer for Mass Effect 2. I think one of the nice things of like observing pipelines and just kind of watching how things work as a technical artist is you're kind of spotting those fires, but sometimes I couldn't move the resources around enough to help actually address some of the problems coming up in production. And so as a producer, I actually felt like I had a little bit more leeway to kind of like move the pieces around the chessboard, so to speak, to kind of address those fires. I learned a lot about making games and troubleshooting and workflow, efficiencies, technical performances, and balancing budgets during my time at BioWare. I felt really very, very fortunate to have my time there. And I loved working with the team, just kind of problem solving and finding unique solutions that pop up every day during production. And I think that's like one of the things I really didn't know much about video game development until I started my job there. But there's so much more than just making really great art. There's collaboration and working with other team members, and problem solving was a big thing. After Mass Effect 2 shipped, and it was a really fun project to work with all my friends, and we felt really great about it. I moved down to Seattle in the United States to join Microsoft. They had started to spin up a new studio called 343 Industries to handle the Halo franchise. And I personally love science fiction, so it was a really great match. It was really exciting time to be part of a team. There were so many artists that I admired, on the internet, and they actually built this really, really great, strong team. And so I admired them, I looked up to them, and I just felt really honored to be able to work with them. I've been at 343 for almost 11 years now, and it's been really rewarding and challenging, and exciting to work on a beloved franchise like Halo. My job for the last few years has been focusing on external relationships. So I'm working with outsourced partners around the globe to help with different aspects of our game. A lot of the time, it's really identifying the needs from our team and then finding the right partner to work with, and kind of managing that relationship to make sure everything, that the work is completed, that expectations are understood, communication is flowing, unblocking any issues that might pop up. So very similar to a lot of the work that I was doing for at Bioware, but just in a slightly different perspective. It's been super fun, and I love seeing like all the incredible artwork that we generate. So as a fan of science fiction, like every day, my mind is blown by all the cool spaceships and environments that we make. And I feel very, very lucky to have a career that allows me to be a creative problem solver, and to work in science fiction for as many years as I've had. And so I'm very grateful and inspired to kind of make some really cool stuff, and just really happy to be here today to talk a bit more about that.
Thank you, Adrian. And definitely, I share the excitement about all the cool stuff that you guys are doing. So great to have you here.
Thanks, Esteban.
And we'll move on to Sam Carlisle. Sam, you want to share a little bit about your journey in the industry?
Sure. I think both Adrian and Nicole's journeys are really exciting. And I just think of the list of games we worked on are some of my favorites in there. Definitely with Sunset Overdrive and with Halo. So I really my games career started at Sumo. I've done a little bits and bats before there, but Sumo Digital, which are a developer based in the UK. So I live in the UK, up in Sheffield. They are a multi-platform, multi-project developer. So they're a developer for hire. So they didn't have their own IP at the time. They do now, do have some of their own IPs now, but back then they didn't. And they were hired in to create games for other people. So we worked on several different franchises at any one time. And like Adrian and Nicole, I joined as an artist. I came in an external as an environment artist, and I worked there as an environment artist for a couple of years. And what they did was they started an insourcing studio. So they started a studio in India, an art studio in India. And this was a pretty new thing to be doing in the industry, full stop. And it's a difficult thing to get going. And at one point they asked if I would go out to India and just be there as an artist for a while and help them get into the Sumo way of doing things and the swing of doing things. So the India studio was based in a place called Pune, which is just a bit north of Mumbai. And so my first trip to India, I went there for 3 months. And I worked as an artist out in India at their studio. So I got firsthand to taste what it's like to be an outsourced artist, and I did that for several months. They're a great team, and I took a lot of lessons from that, especially based around where we think problems are and what the genuine source of problems are and how it feels to be on the other side. And I loved working there, and I loved India. It's an amazing country. And so I came back and took up my role again as an environment artist. And then they kind of grew that, and they asked me to take on a position of outsource manager, which I think back then was a pretty new title, to be honest, in the industry, full stop. the idea of an outsource manager. So I took on the role to help the India studio, and to just expand the external development that they were doing across all the projects, so to build up an external development network and a way of working. And I was at Sumo for 8 years, and as the kind of outsource world kind of grew, and we played a big part in that. I think we were involved with some of the studios that are now very familiar to people. We were there and gave them some of their earliest projects, and we worked with them in the early days when they were much smaller studios, and it was exciting. And I learned a very tough lesson, which was I was a pretty good artist, but not anywhere near as good as the people I was working with. And we would work with these talented artists from around the world, and it got to the point where there was no competition, and I just had to accept the fact that there was a role there to help people this good work really well with other people who are far better than me as well. And I really enjoyed that role. I really enjoyed working with talented people. I really loved seeing what they could produce and seeing what we could do to help them produce their best work. So it was exciting, and I enjoyed working with all the other different cultures out there as well. And then Sumo grew, and eventually Microsoft, I joined Microsoft to help with their external development partners and support their studios with their external development for the EMEA regions, which is basically Europe. And I joined a central team in Microsoft to do that, at Xbox to do that. And then that kind of grew, and I now support from our team, and I work with Esteban in this team. We now support all of our studios with their external development. Our group helps them find the right suppliers, supports them through that, supports our suppliers in working with Xbox and the challenges that they can face. That can be quite unique to our group. And so we get to learn the landscape and understand what's going on there, bring in some of the experiences we've had. I get to work with fantastically talented people like Adrian and Nicole and all the external development managers and teams that support them around there, and chip in. They are my customers, if you like. Chip in and help where I can. And it's an exciting, ever-changing and evolving job. And I think especially recently, the way that Xbox has been evolving and growing and taking on bigger challenges, it's been a particularly exciting time to be at Xbox. So I feel very lucky, and it's been a real pleasure and really exciting.
Thank you, Sam. And definitely I share the excitement as well. I think this is really a great time to be in the gaming industry in general. A lot of really nice things happening. All right, so let's get into a more specific topic, since we're talking about large AAA franchises or projects. So when you look at the multi-year approach for a large-scale project, we talked about hundreds of people and a lot of complexity. Since you guys are responsible for finding that talent outside your studios, your teams, or to support your teams, how you handle that, how you manage the ebbs and flows from the perspective of there are times when you need a lot of talent and very specific talent. There are times where you may not need the same skill resources. So how you keep sanity throughout the lifetime of that production cycle? Who wants to share their experience?
I can go and start things off if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think communication is actually really key, and so how I interpret that is like staying in touch with both our internal teams and our external teams to understand what their capacity needs are, try to figure out the how, when, and what. So constantly checking in with our internal team about their schedules and their needs. Things shift even for long-term projects. Things can change on a dime, and so always kind of just keeping an eye on. Like part of my job is just keeping an eye on, hey, do we make any creative decisions that would actually bump something up a little bit earlier, and just kind of talking with both the art leads and the production team to understand like how many assets they are anticipating and needing and by when. And then I go out and work with our external partners to see if they have the right people, they have capacity and the expertise to take on the work. And so it's sometimes those negotiations and chats can go on for months to even years. what we really want to do is make sure that our external partners are prepared and ready for when we do a proper handoff. During low demand times, I'm going to use the example of pre-production. For me, is usually kind of a low demand time. It's you usually have a smaller skeleton crew that's kind of prototyping the game, trying to figure out how are you going to build it, what you're building. And typically I would then spin up a small skeleton team to prototype alongside with our internal team. And the idea is really just to get the teams comfortable and working with each other. And it's also kind of setting expectations where it's like, hey, we're not in a high stress environment. We are just solving problems together. It goes back to what we're saying, like a lot of game development is collaboration. So it's important to give that time during that low demand time for all parties to just kind of get to know each other, test out the workflow, and kind of just arrive at results that meets everyone's needs. And so pre-production is really just trying to figure out, understand what you're going to make and how you're going to make it. Ideally, when you exit the pre-production phase, you've kind of answered a lot of the questions about pipeline production, and everyone says, oh yeah, it's kind of like a dress rehearsal. They're like, yeah, we know what we have to do, and then you kind of go do it, and that's the production phase. One of the key things, if possible, is you want to make sure that process is repeatable. And so my job is kind of just to monitor how the work is being created. We're making sure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel each time. And if we find some efficiencies, we say, hey, great, like you create this one type of asset now, you can kind of do it multiple times over. During the high demand time, I usually interpret that as production, and that's when we kind of scale up both internally and externally, and things get really busy, and you don't have that luxury of time necessarily to kind of do the problem solving that you did during pre-production. And so production can last months and years depending on the project. In this phase, the team ideally has answered, how they're going to build it and how they're going to make the things. And so it's really just about building all the stuff, and you're planning with the external partners of like, hey, like now we need to make, hundreds of assets. This is the team, like everyone's kind of agreed upon the estimates and the effort involved. And so everyone has a good idea. Basically we have a plan and then we just kind of execute on the plan. I think what we should have is a good idea of how much time it takes, and then the type of assets that we're making. So whether it's rocks or like environment props or weapons or armors or characters, whatever it is, we've kind of built up a good knowledge of that during pre-production, and constant communication during this phase as well, just to make sure everything's going okay, because we can't assume that just because everything went well during pre-production that the same thing happens during production. There will always be kind of problems that pop up during any particular phase, so you kind of have to create a really good plan, but also be nimble enough to kind of adjust to anything that pops up. One of the things that actually I think is really important is to understand velocity. Now, whether it's our internal team or our external teams, to just understand like, hey, this is how long it takes to do this particular task. And we want to make sure and track and have data to make those decisions, so that if the velocity changes, and velocity is basically how long it takes for a particular person to do a task. And so with that, we should be able to estimate like how things are going. And so we need tools. Sometimes we use tools like Azure DevOps, and we call it ADO, or Jira in the past. And it's really just to gather that data, and then that actually helps inform us to basically how to plan out the rest of the production. I'm trying to think what else, and then kind of look at burn down charts. We're just kind of observing how teams are working out, and then just making sure the trends are going well. And then we work with our external partners to make sure that they understand our production needs and the type of information that we need to track to make those decisions. And so I hope that kind of explains, like, from my perspective, the difference of like high and low demand times, and also the type of work that we do during that, and also how the data that we collect to help us inform, do we need to add more people at a certain point in time in production? And so it's there's a gut feeling part of it, but we back it up by data, and that's the really important part. And yeah, sorry, that's that's my spiel on pre-production and production times.
Yeah, and I suspect also that data is key here to drive a lot of those decisions, right? And not only rely on I think I need this or that, right?
Yeah, and that directly feeds into the resource planning. And I think every team kind of has a different flow, I guess. Like sometimes some teams will do like 2-week sprints or 3-week sprints or 4-week sprints, so whatever the team needs. But there's always just check-in points. And I think one philosophy that we have on our team is that we can probably project very well, like 3 to 4 weeks out, but longer term planning, it's a little bit harder. So then what we want to do is just kind of gather that data over time, and then it goes back to the repeatable process part. So if we can kind of say, hey, yeah, like we have like 6 months worth of data and we know how we're going to land, then it helps us then kind of look forward into time.
Yeah, no, definitely spot on. Thank you, Adrian. Anyone wants to share additional perspective on that? Is that your experience, Nicole, on kind of the different models that you've experienced with probably a combination of larger internal teams versus probably projects where external development is larger than the actual internal teams? Does that change the equation when it comes to that balance?
Yeah, actually, Adrian's answer is very well thought out and very well rounded, echoing a lot of the same sentiments that he just said. Definitely finding during the pre-production phase, it is a great time. Your own internal team is almost, especially if you're a new studio, trying to establish your own pipelines and processes, and then you have a small team externally, and going back and forth just kind of help define that process and evolve it and make it better going forward. Because once you are in production, like ideally everything's figured out, so it can be as smooth as it can be. Even though in production things do pop up, and you take it as it comes. But yeah, like past experiences working with larger scale teams, communication is really key. And luckily, when you're on a longer project, it's easier to, have those data points from the past and be able to use that to like very confidently kind of guesstimate like what's going forward. Like I know we can commit to this much work for this milestone or whatever, and feel confident being able to hit it because you foster that relationship with your external team. And everyone's on the same page, and you can count on that going forward. So that's a nice place to be in going forward. Yeah.
Good. No, thank you for sharing that. And I what I'm hearing consistently is communication and using data to kind of support your decision making and your planning. And I think that's super important because the expectation is that you're going to be working with teams across the world from different cultures, different time zones, different ways of working. And you also have your own culture within the studio and within your teams. And I think that's what makes kind of those projects exciting, but at the same time challenging, because if you don't know how to manage those variables, then obviously it's going to be harder. Which is a great segue for the next topic I want to chat with the panel, which is we've talked a lot about external development and partners and suppliers from different places that bring different skills and so on. What are your thoughts in terms of when you have a list of partners, how you actually start building a shorter list of partners that meet the requirements with the idea of start testing those partners that ultimately is going to end in choosing one or a few to work with. Sam, do you want to chime a little bit on that part of the process?
Well, it was something that I get heavily involved in, but I get involved in up to a certain point these days. Certainly, as an outsource manager, you look to find the right partner, and a lot of what our group does is help teams find the right creative fit. And there is a variety of reasons why you pick a certain partner, and quality gets you in through the door. That's unless you're hitting quality, unless you're seeing the quality in the portfolio and the work that they're doing, there's not enough there to draw somebody's eye to what you're trying to do, the work you can produce. The other big area is communication. And then there is also what I found, and I'm talking very generally here because I work with obviously a lot of studios, and each one is completely different, and their approach is completely different, and their needs are completely different. And what they're wanting, it kind of stays the same, but the way of getting there can vary, and it can vary on the type of project, and it can vary on the type of teams you're working with. One of the things that I've noticed right now is because we are seeing, or I've noticed it start to change, is because we're seeing some very long-term relationships evolving. People are prepared to put in far more time in the early stages to find that right partner. Typically, you look at a list, and we quite often work with our studios to help them find that initial list, and then they whittle that down to they reduce that down to the ones that they're really particularly keen on, having spoken to the rest of their teams, so their art leads and the rest, and got their input, and then go forward to a testing phase. We find that this testing phase could be quite extended these days, and it even can extend into the first part of the contract from the people that they've actually chosen to work with. The first milestone, if you like, because there's still a point there that you can either end the relationship or you can expand on it depending on how that's going. I've seen teams that have picked studios that haven't produced the best quality work, but they have had the best relationship with during the testing phase. So they've looked at them and said, look, perhaps it didn't produce as good a quality final piece as this other studio. However, we really enjoyed working with them, and we can get them there. And it's more important for us to have a relationship with a team that we know we can enjoy and we can grow than it is just to start straight off with the best piece of work that came in. So there has been a real shift to the relationship because our developments are getting so integrated, and our external partners are such an essential part of what we do. And the AAA game is years in the making. So when it comes to partner selection, what I am seeing, and obviously Adrian and Nicole will be able to speak to it more immediately, is a general shift towards a longer test phase and priorities in communication and creative relationship, shifting up the ladder to, as opposed to just the first turnaround in terms of quality. And cost is maybe taking a bit more of a back seat. It's there in the mind. I mean, there's a partner should not be uncompetitive, but there's a lot of improvements and a lot of efficiencies you can gain by process that can compensate for a small difference in, or a difference in day rate, say, between vendors. But yeah, we over to Adrian and Nicole. I'm sure can speak more.
Yeah, Adrian, and you.
I echo a lot of what Sam kind of talked about. I like having the longer engagement times to get to know the external partners, and we'll work with multiple partners for different areas of the game. And I kind of approach it from from the very beginning. I think sometimes I'm introduced to a studio that's really awesome that usually sometimes comes from Sam or Esteban, or sometimes, like, coming to a place like Big and just kind of meeting, I didn't know, this company did the service. And I think that's really the beginning. And then we usually kind of, look at their portfolio, and always in the back of my mind, I'm just trying to make a match with what our team needs. And if things go really well, then we usually start with a small engagement, and we go from there. I think over the years, I've had some really great partners who do a very niche job. Like they can do hair development really great. They're the best in the industry doing hair. But at some point, if the relationship goes well, I'm kind of constantly monitoring that. It's like, hey, they're producing this great product. Are all the other cylinders firing? Like, how is their communication back with our team? Are their production processes solid? Even billing an invoice, things like that. Basically, the whole spectrum. So art is one component, or design is one component, and engineering, but it's the whole ecosystem of like how their particular company operates. And so once I have a good idea of like, hey, I think this partner has, they have great artists and content creators, but their biz ops team is really solid as well. Those are usually good indicators. And then we look for areas to expand their responsibility. And I think that's the really fun part, but it takes time. And sometimes that can take years of trust building and seeing that the partner can take on more complex work, and we scale up. And I know I'm speaking from I feel kind of privileged is that sometimes our projects actually have that time to allow for that. There's definitely some projects who are much shorter time spans, and sometimes you just have to kind of run with it. But luckily for the games that I work on, we usually have quite a few years to kind of work that out. And so by the time we get into production, fairly confident in the partner. And then we basically, even over the years, we kind of expand their responsibility, and they're always happy. They're like, hey, we want to do more. We want to, instead of just doing hair, we want to do characters and stuff like that. So that's how instead of a test per se, it's kind of like we're just building up that trust over years and then kind of providing more complex tasks for them.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about the investment on both ends, right? To like really tailor those teams to work together, even across time zones and across geographies. And you have to obviously have the perspective of time, and it is not just a transactional element. So you have to build that relationship and be patient about it too.
That's a good point about like, I kind of want to make sure that we set a really good foundation, and it's worthwhile, I think, investing in that initial time, because if you go down a path with a partner that you don't quite know, and if things don't turn out great, then it's you lose that investment time. So it's kind of, I'd rather just kind of take things slow and make sure everything is kind of working well before we kind of progress to the next steps.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Nicole, do you want to share some thoughts on this topic too?
I agree with Adrian as well. Just taking it slow, having a longer initial time, just testing out with a partner, it's really helpful just to be able to evaluate them on all things. And also, as Sam was saying, cost tends to be almost one of the last things that we're considering. Like, sure, there are budget restrictions that we have to work within, but at least on my end, I'm looking for just art direction, technical direction, communication, then cost estimates, and the final delivery. Where the communication is one of the most important things, because especially once you get into the thick of things with work, you want to be able to rely on that consistency and just know that any technical requirements are being met, and there needs to be kind of, I guess, like less hand-holding going forward, and that you can count on the quality of work to come in going forward. And even to, on the back end of things with invoicing and dealing with project managers, just making sure that everything goes smoothly. So you're not always having to constantly like chase things down, or it just goes smoothly. And that's really important, because there's like a whole other side to just the actual content creation of stuff. There's the whole other side, and you want to make sure that everything goes smoothly. So overall, the whole process is positive.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of production and actually part of the day-to-day working with those partners, is probably one of the differentiators here is the large volume of assets, or even large assets. So what are your thoughts in terms of what are the key considerations for partners that work with you in your projects managing that volume of assets?
If I can jump in again, just for me, it is the consistency, just on current projects and past projects, being able to rely on that, all the documentation is thorough, it's been read, understood, there's alignment between their internal leads and our internal leads. So going forward, everything comes in as expected, and there's less rework, less feedback loops, and just kind of saving headaches and making the process move through everyone going forward.
I like that, saving headaches. Adrian, any words on how that works at 343 in terms of, I imagine, kind of the high volume of assets working?
Sometimes that could be, it's when we're looking at external work, I kind of look at it as one type of category. So if a team comes to me and says, hey, we have a large volume of work, it's just a fun problem to solve. And so I usually look at, is the process repeatable? And I think kind of that goes with like Nicole just saying, hey, the consistency, or is every asset unique? We look at how complex the pipeline is. I think usually when we're dealing with large volume of assets, the constraints are basically like, how much time do we have? How much time does it take to build each asset? Can we get the team to get to that velocity? And then what's our cost constraints? And also, like, if we're talking about large volumes, like what's the quality? Will the partner need training? Those are all the things that, again, we kind of try to figure out hopefully during pre-production and answer that. And then once we have some data to back it up, then we can say, hey, this is the plan and this is how we're going to execute on the plan. I'm trying to think for large assets too. One thing that like I do think about is like also the QA time, because it's if you're doing small batches, that's fine. But like if you're doing large assets, you kind of want to be able to like, hey, what's our how do we test all this stuff? And the cool thing is if it's a large volume of assets and it's a repeatable process, and maybe I kind of look for ways we can actually say be more efficient. And again, this goes back to like the tech art part. Can we batch process any of that stuff? Can we save some time if we train the partner to do these few steps? Can they just rinse and repeat and do that over again? So always kind of looking if there's a template that can be used to save time. What can kind of reduce the amount of human error in things. And then most importantly for large volumes is, can the partner meet those capacity needs? And I think that's one of the things. Once we get the data, we work with the partners, say, hey, now that they've gone through a few cycles, they can say, yes, we confidently feel like we can take on all that work. Now if they can't, then another strategy to use is then consider splitting up the work. And you can say, hey, like I might need again, you're looking at the problem and say, hey, like we've got a really good studio that can do most of the, or maybe half the work. Maybe we have to figure out how else we would split up the rest of the work. So maybe I work with another studio to pick up the remaining work.
That makes a lot of sense, Adrian. Thank you for sharing. All right, let's shift gears a little bit as we move into Q&A. So any thoughts on people are looking, not necessarily from the perspective of, hey, I want to partner with a Microsoft studio or an Xbox studio, but from the perspective of, hey, I want to be part of one of those AAA teams that do Halo, Forza, Gears, and others. Any thoughts that you want to share on how people can get into the industry?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll feel this one just initially. I think if you're looking to become an Xbox partner, if you're looking to become into the industry like that, I think again, it's a lot of it's just about quality, about seeing something in your portfolio, see something in what you do that catches the eye, that you really that leaves an impression. There are a lot of portfolios that look quite similar. We can see we can do things competently, but I think a lot of the time you're dealing with, for example, if you're looking in the art creation, whatever, you're dealing with artists. The person who'll be choosing will have an art background most likely. So they'll be looking for that little flair, that's something that catches their eye and leaves an impression. And go, oh, you're the guys that did such and such. So I think it's always, if you can come up with an original angle, or you can come up with something that you think you can really shine at, put that, excuse me, put that in. The other thing, excuse me, a frog in my throat. The other thing is to keep at it. I know that it sounds quite simple, but there's something to be said for people seeing you time and time again, because it's unlikely that it's going to be the first time when they see a brand new name, they go, oh, great, we're going to jump on that. There is a consistency in there. They keep seeing you at the same places or the same events, or they keep seeing some updates. They go, okay, I can see how they're evolving. They're still around. They're still working. They are a solid studio that's existing and growing, and seeing that adds confidence. And there's a horrible early stage, especially when you're doing work and it's under NDA and you can't show your best work because it's 2 years before somebody will let you show it. There is an understanding that's happening. So make sure there's something in your portfolio that sits outside of that. And then, like I say, just keep your head above the parapet, keep looking and keep being there. And then hopefully one of the studios or myself will look at it and go, it'd be great to get you in the database at least. Or one of the studios will go, you know what, they could be a good fit.
Thank you, Sam. Adrian, Nicole, you want to share some thoughts? And I guess the angle probably just to kind of complete the idea here is like, as an individual, right? If someone says, hey, I want to be like Adrian, I want to be like Nicole working in a large studio, what will be kind of your thoughts on putting people on that path if that's what they want?
I think in general, like on the individual side, there's so many different aspects to the game industry that you could be a part of. So I think it's really just finding like what part of the aspect of the game industry that you want to be in, and really just going at it and trying to like learn as much as you can. Um, as far from like an art side, you know, having that portfolio and then participating in industry events or places like ArtStation where you can be posting your work and engaging with other people. Networking is a huge thing just to kind of get your name out there and learn more from other people. And just to continue expand your skill sets, because especially as an artist, like it never just ends. You just, there's always new tools, there's always new workflows to keep learning and improve your skill set, and you know, just keep your portfolio up to date and just keep at it.
Great advice, Nicole. Thank you. Adrian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I really agree with a lot of what Nicole and Sam have already covered. I think having an updated portfolio is really important. I think that's the first thing that catches my eye, and whether it's an individual artist or a studio, I'm kind of looking for like, are they up to date with you know, modern game development pipelines? Do they understand how to take create work, like use the tools and programs that we are using. So there's a lot of actually research, and the nice thing is that information's out there. And so I'm looking for an artist who can not only just do really awesome, you know, artwork, but can they actually make that work in the game? Because again, like making the beautiful, making really amazing artwork is actually just one component of game development. There's a lot of collaboration. You have to make sure that kind of goes through the pipeline. Can you import that into an engine? I mean, we're in this amazing phase where a lot of the tools are actually available to the public now. There's a lot of game engines out there. So the nice thing is people can, you know, take their model from Substance or Maya, run it through the pipeline. And to be honest, when I'm looking at portfolios, I like seeing the really nice glossy high-res render, but I'm really interested in the process. Like I want to see the shader nodes. I want to see how they tackle those problems. Are they making efficient game res meshes? How are they solving those problems? Because one thing that I'm looking at both as for individual artists or partners is I call it the plug and play component. Like if they can demonstrate a good understanding and ability of our modern game development pipeline, it's easier for them to then transition into making content for our game. If someone does one component really well, but doesn't really understand the full process, then it's a little bit more troublesome because they can create an asset that's beautiful, but it doesn't run in any engine. So it's so complex that it crashes the GPU. And so I think a little bit of reference and research is always good.
Thank you, Adrian. And awesome input and comments here. Really appreciate you guys being here today. I think we have a little bit of time for a couple of questions, so I'm just going to read from the chat. This is from the audience, and some of this I think was already addressed by Sam. I see one saying, how can I become an Xbox partner studio? So Sam already talked a little bit about that. I think he also touched on what's the most important skill you look. So we talked about communication be kind of the right fit for the project. So it's kind of difficult to have a single answer. But I want to touch on something that probably it's top of mind for the audience. From your perspective, and I'm just reading a question, what are the biggest challenges the Brazilian industry faces when it comes to external development? Anyone wants to, Sam, you want to share some thoughts?
Brazil has been really interesting. I first came across the Brazilian teams over a decade ago, and I was at the events longer than that, I think. At the events, we would check in with Brazil, and Brazil always struck me as an area that was absolutely primed to deliver fantastic service providers, really top there. It's a whole of Latam, a highly creative, highly energetic country on a fantastic timeline with America, which is actually rare. West Coast America has an awful timeline with most of our external partners when you look at Asia and the rest. So there's real potential there. But year in, year out, we'd see that there wasn't a big improvement or a big development in what they were producing or what we were seeing coming out of Brazil. They weren't accelerating at the same pace that we saw in Malaysia and Southeast Asia and India and China. It wasn't happening. I would say that has changed in the last probably 4 or 5 years. We're seeing that acceleration, we're seeing some fantastic work coming out of Brazil, coming out of Latin America. And we're also, what's fascinating, is we're seeing those little pods, those ecosystems starting to form of smaller teams and larger teams, but forming communities that are then kind of feeding off each other. And then there is that ecosystem is really developing, accelerating, and it's events like Big and the organization around it that need to take an awful lot of credit for helping for this to happen and spreading that kind of awareness. So the biggest blockers, I think, perhaps with Brazil at the moment, or some of the challenges that Brazil faces, is when you reach this phase where the country's accelerating into creating better talent, it's the education system. It's actually producing that talent. It's keeping the flow from the universities and making sure that they are keeping up to date with the latest techniques, that they are being able to educate the next generation in the right way, and keeping up with the methodology and how to do it from a production standpoint. So I think really look to your universities, keep advertising Brazil. I think the pace is growing, the ball is rolling now. I think they just need nudges and keep pushing it over. And like I say, keeping that awareness running. And I have no doubt that we'll see a step change again with Brazil in terms of their engagement. So I'm highly optimistic for the future. And one of the side effects of the awful pandemic has been that everyone's experienced external development, game development studios now, one way or another. Everybody has experienced that, and that Brazil can ride along with that, and I think it will open up with that. So right now, there's nothing particularly stopping Brazil, but there are things you can do to encourage it, and they're around education, they're around infrastructure, and they're around awareness. Is my 2 cents.
Great thoughts, Sam. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I have another question for the panel, which is, what are the challenges that you encounter the most when working with different cultures? Adrian, Nicole, or Sam, anyone wants to share some thoughts on that one?
In past experiences, I have found sometimes certain cultures, from our perspective, can take feedback very literal, or documentation or a brief for what an asset's going to be. So just making sure, like knowing that when you're going into engaging on certain work, if you need to be more descriptive or actually say like, the artist can take liberties and, develop this rather than like they need to make exactly this image that I'm sending you. So stuff like that. And then also just in general too, and this is just kind of to everyone, when I think about different language barriers for different studios, I try to think of best practices on our end. A lot of times when I'm getting feedback from other artists too, they'll embed the text that they're writing on an image. And so then when it goes to the external development side, they can't copy and paste that and translate, which causes more work on their end. So I always try to encourage like getting people to think more about it and actually just have the text separated. So it just makes it easier, and just having considerations for everything on all sides.
Gotcha. Thank you, Nicole. And we are right on time. So a few important thoughts. Thank you very much, Nicole, Adrian, and Sam, for being here today. And thank you very much for Big Festival for having us over, for inviting us to the panel, for sharing our experiences. Thank you to the audience for listening and also asking questions. I saw we have a few more questions, but we ran out of time. Actually, if you are passionate or interested in the topic, there are different events throughout the year, but the one I recommend you guys check is XDS later in the year. That's an event exclusively dedicated to external development, where you actually can go deep into different topics like the ones we touched on today. So thank you very much, and I hand over to our host.
Thank you so much, Esteban, Adrian, Nicole, and Sam. Thank you very much.
Big Festival 2021, the biggest games festival in Latin America.